A mountain man rides through a frozen pass. When he finds a young girl doubled over in the snow, holding her belly and crying for help. He thinks he's saving a mother-to-be from a cruel husband. But the moment he lifts her into his saddle, everything shifts. Because what she's hiding under her coat isn't a baby at all. It's a newborn she stole from a powerful man who will burn the whole valley to get her back. Suddenly, the quiet mountain becomes a battlefield of thundering hooves, twisted lies, and a secret that could bring down an empire. The mountain man must decide if he'll risk his own life and his soul to protect a stranger and a child who isn't hers. But what if the truth buried under her tears is far darker than anyone knows? And when the gun smoke clears, will his act of mercy save the whole valley or destroy it? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind whistled through the pines as Luke Branham guided his horse along the trap line. Fresh snow had begun falling, dusting his broad shoulders and the brim of his worn hat. The late afternoon light was fading fast, painting long shadows across the mountainside. His breath came out in white puffs as he checked another empty trap. The creak of leather and the soft crunch of his horse's hooves in the snow were familiar companions after so many years alone in these mountains. Luke had grown used to the silence, though sometimes it pressed in too close, reminding him of all he'd left behind. A sound caught his ear, something different from the usual whisper of wind through branches. He reined his horse to a stop, listening. There it was again, a sob, carried on the bitter wind. Luke's years as a cavalry scout had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were telling him someone was in trouble. He turned his horse toward a rocky outcrop where the sound seemed to originate. As he drew closer, the sobbing grew clearer, definitely human and definitely female. Luke's hand instinctively moved to rest on his rifle, though he kept it in its scabbard. Too many years on the frontier had taught him that things weren't always what they seemed. Behind a jumble of snow-dusted boulders, he found her. A young woman, probably in her late 20s, huddled against the rock face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her dark hair falling in tangles around a face streaked with tears and dirt. Both arms were wrapped protectively around her middle, where her dress strained against what appeared to be a heavily pregnant belly. "Ma'am?" Luke kept his voice gentle, like he would with a spooked horse. "You hurt?" She startled, pressing herself harder against the rocks. Her eyes were wide with fear, darting between Luke and the gathering shadows, as if expecting someone else to appear. "Please," she whispered, her voice rough from crying. "Please don't. Tell him where I am." Luke dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Tell who, ma'am?" "My husband." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. He struck me, said he'd kill me and the baby both, drove me from our wagon and told me to run. Luke studied her carefully. Her story might explain the torn dress and the terror in her eyes, but something didn't sit quite right. Still, if she was telling the truth, she needed help badly. The temperature was dropping with the sun, and a woman in her condition wouldn't survive a night exposed to the elements. "What's your name?" he asked, moving a step closer. "Amanda." She swallowed hard. "Amanda Wynne." "I'm Luke Branham." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Did you see which way your husband went?" "South, I think. Along the main trail." She gestured vaguely, then named a few landmarks that Luke recognized. "We passed through with the Weber wagon train last week, but James, my husband, he wanted to break away, said we'd make better time alone. The Weber train had indeed come through these parts recently. Luke had traded some furs with them. Her knowledge of the area lent some credence to her story, though that nagging feeling of something being off remained. "You're half frozen, Mrs. Wynne." Luke shrugged out of his heavy coat and held it out to her. "My line shack's about an hour's ride from here. It ain't much, but it's warm and dry." Amanda hesitated, one hand still curved protectively over her middle. "You'd help me? Even without knowing for certain if I'm telling the truth?" "Reckon the good Lord knows if you're telling the truth," Luke replied. "And he'd have my hide if I left a woman out here to freeze, truth-teller or not." A ghost of a smile touched her lips as she accepted his coat with trembling hands. Luke helped her wrap it around her shoulders, noting how she winced when he touched her arm. Whether from her husband's abuse or something else, the pain seemed genuine enough. Getting her onto his horse proved a careful operation. Luke was conscious of her condition, moving slowly and supporting her weight as she settled into the saddle. He took the reins and began leading the horse on foot, picking their way carefully through the increasing snow. They traveled in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft nickering of the horse and the wind in the pines. The snow was falling heavier now, thick flakes catching in Amanda's dark hair and on the shoulders of Luke's coat. "Mr. Branham?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Just Luke is fine." Luke. She seemed to test the name. "Do you believe in second chances?" The question caught him off guard. He thought of battlefields he'd rather forget, of choices that still haunted his dreams. "Reckon God might," he said finally. "Me, I ain't so sure anymore." Amanda fell silent again, but he could feel her eyes on him as they continued their slow journey. The light was nearly gone by the time his line shack came into view, a simple log structure nestled against the mountainside. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, his morning fire still smoldering, thank Providence. Luke helped Amanda down from the horse, steadying her as her feet touched the snow. In the gathering dark, with the lamplight from the cabin's single window painting her face in warm hues, she looked younger and more vulnerable than ever. "You'll be safe here," he told her, leading her towards the door. "For tonight, at least." Amanda's fingers tightened on his arm as they approached the cabin. "Thank you," she whispered, and in those two words he heard a wealth of relief and something else. Perhaps hope, perhaps fear. Luke couldn't be sure which, but as he opened the door to his humble shelter, he sent up a silent prayer that he was doing the right thing. The cabin's warmth enveloped them as they stepped inside, the fire's glow casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Luke knew his simple life was about to become considerably more complicated, but watching Amanda sink gratefully onto the bench near the hearth, he couldn't find it in his heart to regret his decision. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks and transforming the mountain into a realm of white silence. The night settled in around the little cabin, while inside, two souls marked by past hurts began the cautious dance of learning to trust again. Luke added another log to the pot-bellied stove, the iron door creaking as he stoked the glowing embers back to life. Behind him, Amanda huddled close to the warmth, his coat still wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her face remained pale, but some color had returned to her cheeks. The familiar aroma of coffee soon filled the small cabin as Luke set his battered tin pot on the stove. He moved with the careful efficiency of a man used to living alone, gathering 2 cups from the rough-hewn shelf while keeping a watchful eye on his unexpected guest. "Much obliged," Amanda murmured when he handed her a steaming cup. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it, and Luke noticed how she kept her other arm pressed firmly against her middle, even while sipping the hot coffee. The cabin's single room suddenly felt smaller than usual. Luke cleared his throat. "Got some clean things you could change into? They belonged to my—" He paused, the words catching. My late wife. Amanda's eyes widened slightly. I wouldn't want to impose. Sarah would have wanted them used, Luke cut in, his voice gruff but kind. He crossed to the cedar chest in the corner and lifted the lid. The faint scent of lavender still clung to the carefully folded garments inside. His fingers found a simple brown dress, practical and warm. This should fit, even with your condition. Something flickered across Amanda's face. Guilt, perhaps, but it vanished so quickly Luke wasn't sure he'd seen it at all. She accepted the dress with murmured thanks. I'll step outside while you change, Luke said, already moving toward the door. Holler if you need anything. The night air bit at his face as he stood on the small porch, watching snowflakes swirl in the lamplight that spilled through the window. Through the glass, he could see Amanda's shadow moving about. Something about her silhouette nagged at him. The way she moved didn't quite match what he'd expect from a woman in her final months of pregnancy. But before he could puzzle it out further, her voice called softly, I'm decent now. When Luke stepped back inside, Amanda stood by the stove in Sarah's old dress. It fit her well enough, though the fabric pulled strangely across her middle, as if she wore something bulky underneath. Hungry? Luke asked, pushing aside his doubts. Got some venison stew I can heat up. Amanda nodded gratefully, sinking onto one of the 2 chairs at his small table. Luke busied himself with the stew pot, stealing glances at his guest as she sat with one arm still pressed protectively around her middle. Her other hand worried at the dress's fabric, smoothing it repeatedly over her supposed belly. The stew warmed quickly, and soon they sat across from each other, steam rising from their bowls. Luke had questions, plenty of them, but he waited, letting the silence do its work. Sure enough, Amanda began to speak, her voice halting and uncertain. James, my husband, he wasn't always cruel, she said, pushing the stew around with her spoon. But something changed when I told him about the baby. He started drinking more, staying out late. Then the hitting started. She swallowed hard. Said he never wanted a child, that it would ruin everything. Luke listened carefully, noting the tremor in her voice, the way her eyes stayed fixed on her bowl. Parts of her story rang true. He'd seen enough of human cruelty to believe that, but something still felt off. How far along are you? He asked quietly. Amanda's spoon clattered against her bowl. Any day now, she whispered. The baby's been moving a lot lately. As if to contradict her words, Luke heard a sound, faint but distinct, that didn't match with her story. It was a whimper, muffled but unmistakably that of a newborn, not an unborn child. Amanda's face paled, and she pressed her arm tighter against her middle, coughing loudly to cover the sound. But Luke had heard enough to confirm his suspicions. They finished their meal in tense silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's single window. Luke cleared away the dishes, then unrolled his bedroll near the door. You take the bed, he said, nodding toward the narrow cot against the far wall. I'll sleep here. Amanda murmured her thanks and settled onto the cot, still fully dressed. Luke stretched out on his bedroll, pulled his blanket up, and pretended to drift off. But his senses remained alert, honed by years of scouting to notice every sound in the darkness. For a long while, there was only the pop and crackle of the fire, the moan of wind through the pines. Then he heard it again, a tiny whimper, followed by Amanda's whispered attempts to quiet it. The sound came not from her belly, but from what he now realized must be a bundle concealed beneath the loose fabric of Sarah's dress. Luke lay still, listening as Amanda rose quietly from the cot. In the dying firelight, he watched through barely opened eyes as she carefully unwrapped something from beneath her clothes. The unmistakable form of a swaddled infant emerged, tiny and perfect, no more than a few days old. "Shh, little one," Amanda whispered, cradling the baby close. "Please be quiet, please." Luke sat up slowly, his movement causing Amanda to whirl around with a gasp of fear. She clutched the infant to her chest, backing away until she hit the wall. "Please," she choked out. "Please, I can explain." "Reckon you better," Luke said quietly, rising to his feet. He moved to the stove and added another log, the fresh light revealing tears streaming down Amanda's face. "I couldn't leave her there," Amanda burst out, her voice breaking. "That man, Drowner, he's not right. He was going to buy her, like she was cattle or dry goods. Her own mother sold her, didn't even look back." She drew a shuddering breath. "I was supposed to be helping with the sale. I'm just a washerwoman at the mining camp, nobody important. But when I saw what was happening, saw that poor mother forced to give up her baby because she couldn't feed her." Amanda's words dissolved into quiet sobs. Luke stood very still, watching as Amanda gently rocked the infant. The baby's face was peaceful in sleep, tiny fingers curled against the blanket. "So you took her," he said. It wasn't a question. Amanda nodded miserably. "I couldn't let that rich man's wife buy her like a new hat. She didn't even want a baby, just wanted to please her husband. They would have raised her on lies, never telling her the truth about where she came from." Her eyes met Luke's, desperate and pleading. "Please don't send us back. They'll arrest me for sure, maybe worse, and she'll still end up with them, living a life built on lies." Luke stared at the sleeping infant, his thoughts churning. The law was clear about theft, but this wasn't a simple case of stolen property. This was a child, and the circumstances of her sale troubled him deeply. He'd seen enough injustice in his life to know that sometimes the law and what was right didn't always align. "Her name is Hope," Amanda whispered into the silence. "I've been calling her Hope." Gray light seeped under the cabin door as Luke shifted on his bedroll, his back stiff from a mostly sleepless night. Every creak of the settling logs, every whisper of wind had kept him alert, his mind churning over Amanda's confession and what it meant for all of them. The baby's soft whimper broke the dawn silence. Luke sat up, watching as Amanda immediately responded, cradling the infant close and speaking in him. Gentle whispers. She had kept Hope quiet most of the night, but now the child's hunger couldn't be denied. "There's goat's milk in the cold box," Luke said, rising to his feet. "It ain't perfect, but it's better than nothing." Amanda looked up gratefully. "Thank you. I've been giving her what I could find, but..." She trailed off, clearly worried about the baby's needs. Luke busied himself at the stove, getting breakfast started while Amanda tended to Hope. The familiar routine of morning, coffee brewing, bacon sizzling, biscuits warming, helped settle his thoughts. But the questions couldn't wait any longer. "Reckon it's time for the whole truth," he said finally, setting a plate of food before Amanda. "Every detail, no matter how small." Amanda nodded, adjusting Hope in one arm while she picked at her breakfast with the other. "I was just a washerwoman at Drowner's mining camp," she began. "Nobody important, nobody who'd be missed. That's probably why they didn't mind me being around when they made their deals." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "At first, I didn't understand what I was hearing. Rich women would visit the camp, always meeting with Drowner's wife in private. Then I started noticing patterns. Young mothers from the poorest families would disappear for days, coming back with empty arms and haunted eyes. But they'd have new dresses, maybe even a bit of money." Luke's jaw tightened. "They were selling their babies." "Not selling, exactly. Not at first." Amanda's voice grew bitter. Drowner's wife called it arranging adoptions for wealthy Eastern couples who couldn't have children. She made it sound so proper, so charitable. But then I saw how it really worked. Hope stirred, and Amanda paused to comfort her before continuing. This little one's mother, she was so young, barely more than a child herself. Her husband died in a mine collapse, leaving her with nothing. When she found out she was expecting, Drowner's wife approached her right away. Promised her the baby would have a better life, with proper schooling and fine clothes. Said it was the Christian thing to do. But, Luke prompted. But then I overheard Drowner himself talking with his wife. They were charging those Eastern couples a fortune for these babies. And the mothers? Amanda's voice cracked. They got barely enough to survive on. Some were even pressured with threats about their jobs at the mine or their families' debts to the company store. Luke stood, pacing the small cabin. And Hope? Her mother changed her mind at the last minute, started crying, saying she couldn't go through with it. But they wouldn't let her leave. They had her locked in a room at the back of the camp office. Amanda hugged Hope closer. I was supposed to be helping prepare the baby for the new parents. But when I saw that poor girl's face, heard her begging, she lifted her chin. I couldn't let it happen. I waited until dark, told her I'd make sure her baby was safe, and ran. The morning light had strengthened, casting long shadows through the cabin's single window. Luke stood at the stove, pouring fresh coffee as he considered their situation. They needed supplies, that much was certain, and he needed to know what kind of search might be underway. I'm riding to Coldwater's trading post, he announced finally. We're low on flour and coffee, and I need to hear what news is circulating. Fear flashed across Amanda's face. What if someone followed my tracks? Snow's covered most signs by now, Luke assured her. But just to be safe, stay inside with the doors barred. There's my old Winchester in the corner. You know how to use a rifle? Amanda nodded. My pa taught me, before he passed. Good. Don't open the door for anyone but me. I'll knock 3 times. Pause, then twice more. Remember that pattern. Luke gathered his gear efficiently, checking his pistol and pulling on his heavy coat. The temperature had dropped overnight, making travel slow and dangerous. It would take several hours to reach the trading post, even pushing his horse as much as the conditions allowed. We'll be fine, Amanda said softly, seeing his concern. Just, please come back. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Luke nodded once, then stepped out into the bitter morning. The ride to Coldwater's trading post was grueling. Ice coated every branch, and the fresh snow made footing treacherous for his horse. Luke kept to the deepest parts of the forest where possible, avoiding the more exposed ridgelines where tracks would be visible. By midday, the trading post's weather-worn sign came into view. Luke dismounted stiffly, leading his horse to the hitching rail. The usual handful of riders' mounts stamped and snorted in the cold, breath steaming. Inside, the post was warm and crowded with the usual mix of traders, trappers, and townfolk seeking refuge from the weather. Luke nodded to familiar faces, making his way to the counter where old Coldwater himself stood, discussing the weather with Deputy Mark Hanley. Luke's steps slowed as he noticed what was tacked to the wall behind them, a fresh wanted poster, the ink barely dry. His heart sank as he recognized Amanda's face in the rough sketch. The words beneath made his blood run cold. Wanted for kidnapping and attempted murder. Awful business, Deputy Hanley was saying, shaking his head. Poor Mr. Drowner's beside himself. Says this crazy woman from the laundry attacked his wife and stole their new baby right out of the cradle. Tried to strangle Mrs. Drowner too, from what I hear. Luke kept his face carefully neutral as he approached the counter. Afternoon, Deputy. Mr. Coldwater. Weather's turning mean out there. Sure is, Luke, Coldwater replied. Ain't seen you down from that mountain in a spell. What can I get you? Just the usual supplies, Luke said, forcing his voice to stay casual. Flour, coffee, some cartridges for the Winchester. While Coldwater gathered his order, Luke listened to the deputy continue spinning Drowner's tale. The story painted Amanda as a dangerous madwoman, fixated on the Drowner's adopted child. There was no mention of the baby's true mother, no hint of the dark business behind it all. "Got search parties combing every valley," Hanley finished. "Drowner's offering a $100 reward, dead or alive. Though alive is preferred, wants her to face proper justice, he says." Luke paid for his supplies, careful not to hurry. "Appreciate the warning about that woman," he said evenly. "I'll keep an eye out up in the high country." The ride back seemed endless. Luke pushed his horse as much as he dared through the treacherous conditions, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. His mind raced with the implications of what he'd learned. Drowner's influence clearly reached deep into local law enforcement. The wanted poster's accusations would make it nearly impossible for Amanda to seek help from any official channels. As dusk gathered, Luke finally spotted the faint glow of his cabin's window through the trees. The sight, usually welcoming, now filled him with fresh worry. That light meant Amanda and Hope were still there, still depending on him. But it also meant they were visible to anyone else who might be searching these mountains. He reined his horse to a stop, studying the cabin and surrounding forest carefully. Everything looked undisturbed. No fresh tracks in the snow, no strange horses hidden in the trees. Still, the wanted poster's words echoed in his mind. Dead or alive? The fate of a young mother and an innocent child now rested partly in his hands. As Luke urged his horse forward through the deepening shadows, he knew their situation had just become far more dangerous than he'd initially feared. Luke stepped into the shack, shaking snow from his shoulders. The warmth hit him first. Then the sight of Amanda in the rocking chair, Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. Without a word, he bolted the door behind him and hung his frost-crusted coat by the stove. "You saw something in town." Amanda's voice was barely above a whisper, reading his grim expression. Luke nodded, pulling up a chair. "There's a wanted poster with your likeness. Drowner's accused you of kidnapping and attempted murder." Amanda's face went pale. Her arms tightened protectively around Hope, who stirred but didn't wake. "Murder? But I never..." "Claims you tried to strangle his wife while stealing their adopted baby." Luke's voice was steady, controlled. "Deputies got search parties combing every valley. Drowner's offering $100 for your capture." Amanda's hands trembled as she smoothed Hope's blanket. "He's made me a criminal. No one will believe my word against his now. Which is why I need the whole truth." Luke leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "No more half-stories. What aren't you telling me about this child?" Tears welled in Amanda's eyes. She took a shaky breath, then spoke so softly Luke had to strain to hear. "She's his. Hope is Silas Drowner's own daughter." Luke sat back, letting the weight of those words sink in. "His daughter?" Amanda nodded. "Her mother was Sarah Mitchell, a housemaid at the main house. Pretty girl, barely 17. Drowner. He took advantage of her position. When she found herself expecting, he promised to take care of everything." Her voice grew bitter. "And he did, in his way. Ordered her killed right after Hope was born, to keep his sin quiet." "Lord have mercy," Luke muttered, running a hand over his face. Sarah knew what was coming. She'd seen too much of Drowner's dealings, heard too many whispered conversations. Amanda shifted Hope gently and reached into her skirts, pulling out a small, worn leather booklet. She kept this hidden, writing down everything she witnessed. The midnight meetings, the money changing hands, which babies went where. She gave it to me the night before. Amanda swallowed hard. The night before they took her away. Luke accepted the journal with careful hands. The pages were filled with shaky handwriting, dates and details methodically recorded. Names of wealthy Eastern couples, amounts paid, descriptions of young mothers pressured or threatened into giving up their children, and throughout, references to Drowner's own cruelties and corruptions. "This is proof," Luke said quietly, turning the pages. "Evidence of everything he's done." Sarah knew it might be needed someday. When I heard them planning to sell Hope, too, to pass her off as just another orphan to some fancy family back east, I couldn't let it happen. Not to Sarah's baby, not after everything else. Luke closed the journal and handed it back. "We can't stay here. Drowner's men will sweep these mountains soon enough." Amanda clutched the booklet to her chest. "Where can we go? That poster makes me a wanted woman everywhere." "I know some folks, good people, about 4 days' ride south." Luke stood, already mentally cataloging what they'd need. "A Navajo silversmith and his wife. They've helped others before who needed to disappear for a spell." He spent the next hours gathering supplies, moving with quiet efficiency in the lantern light. Dried meat and beans went into one saddlebag, coffee and hardtack in another. Extra blankets, ammunition for both rifle and pistol, basic medical supplies. Amanda sat at the table, carefully sewing the journal into a hidden pocket in her petticoat, while Hope slept in a makeshift cradle of soft furs. They took turns sleeping, 3 hours each, though Luke doubted either of them truly rested. Every creak of frost-tightened timber, every whisper of wind made them start. Hope woke once, hungry, and Amanda fed her quickly, humming soft lullabies until the infant drifted off again. An hour before dawn, Luke went out to saddle his horse. The air was knife-sharp with cold, stars still bright overhead. He worked by feel more than sight, fingers sure on familiar leather as he adjusted straps and buckles. Using rope and an old blanket, he fashioned a secure sling that would let Amanda ride while keeping Hope protected against her chest. Back inside, he found Amanda already dressed in his late wife's warmest clothes, Hope bundled against her. The cabin seemed smaller somehow, as if it too knew they were leaving. "Ready?" he asked softly. Amanda nodded, though her eyes lingered on the room's familiar shadows. This place had been sanctuary, however brief. Now they were stepping out into uncertainty, with only trust between them and hope ahead. The first pale light was touching the highest peaks as they emerged. Luke helped Amanda mount, making sure she and Hope were settled safely in the jury-rigged sling. He did one final check of their supplies, then swung up behind them. The horse shifted, adjusting to the unusual weight distribution. Without a word, they left the shack behind, moving carefully through the pre-dawn dimness. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering their tracks from yesterday. Luke knew it would do the same for the trail they made now, but still he chose their path carefully, staying under the heaviest tree cover where possible. Hope slept, warm against Amanda's chest. Amanda herself sat straight and still, one hand resting protectively over the hidden journal that carried such dangerous truth. And Luke guided them forward, away from the mountains that had been his refuge, toward an uncertain sanctuary and whatever justice they might find. The sun crested the peaks behind them, painting the snow-laden branches in rose and gold. They had a long journey ahead, but for now they rode in silence, 3 souls bound together by fate and conscience, carrying proof of one man's sins and an innocent child's rightful heritage, into the dawn. Dawn crept over the mountains in ribbons of pale gold. Luke led his horse down the narrow trail, one hand on the reins, his boots finding careful purchase on the icy stone. Behind him, the animal picked its way forward with slow, steady steps, Amanda seated in the saddle with Hope secured against her chest, in the makeshift sling. "Trail gets better once we clear these upper slopes," Luke said, his breath clouding in the crisp air. "Ground's too frozen for tracking right now, which works in our favor." Amanda adjusted her grip on the saddle horn. "How far are we going?" 4 days' ride, give or take, depending on weather. Luke paused to check the horse's footing around a tricky bend. "Heading toward Navajo country. There's a camp where I've traded pelts before. Good people who deal fair and keep their own counsel." The sun climbed higher as they descended, warming the frost-rimed pines. Luke stopped occasionally to guide Amanda on her seat and balance, showing her how to move with the horse's gait while keeping Hope secure. "Might as well call her Hope for now," Amanda said softly, smoothing the blanket around the sleeping infant. "Seems fitting, somehow." Luke nodded. "Hope's as good a name as any." He didn't add that it might be safer than using whatever name was on her birth record, if such a thing existed. By midday, they'd made it down to more level ground. Luke found a sheltered spot near a half-frozen creek to rest the horse and eat. He gathered dry wood, while Amanda settled on a fallen log, Hope stirring against her chest. "She'll be hungry soon," Amanda said, watching Luke build a small fire. The flames caught quickly in the dry pine needles. Luke hung the coffee pot over the fire and pulled supplies from his saddlebags. "Got some beans here? I'll mash them so you can eat one-handed while tending to her." As the coffee boiled and the beans warmed, Amanda spoke quietly about life in Drowner's mining camp. Her voice carried the weight of memories still fresh and painful. "The women there, most were just trying to survive, you know? Taking in washing, cooking, cleaning. But if they had little ones—" She shook her head. "Drowner would find ways to pressure them. Raise their rent, cut their pay, threaten to fire them. Then his wife would show up, all sympathy and silk skirts, offering money to adopt their babies." Luke stirred the beans, listening. "And if they refused?" "Things would happen, accidents, or their children would just disappear one night." Amanda's arms tightened around Hope. "Sarah, Hope's mother, she saw it all, started writing everything down, said somebody needed to know the truth." "Brave woman," Luke said quietly. Amanda nodded. "She was, right up to the end." They shared the beans and coffee in companionable silence. Luke noticed how Amanda relaxed slightly as she ate, some of the haunted look leaving her eyes. Trust, he knew, was built in small moments like these. The afternoon brought clearer skies, but colder temperatures. Luke led them along the base of the cliffs, staying close to the rocky walls where the snow was thinner. He kept a sharp eye on the ridgelines above, scanning for movement. Just past 3 o'clock, he spotted them. Distant riders silhouetted against the pale sky, moving slowly along the upper ridge. Too far to make out details, but their purposeful progress suggested they were searching. "Down," he whispered sharply, leading the horse into a narrow draw between 2 rock faces. Amanda hunched low over Hope, who thankfully remained quiet. Luke worked quickly, using a pine bough to sweep away their tracks where they entered the draw. Then they waited, pressed close to the cold stone, barely breathing. The sound of hooves on frozen ground carried faintly down to them, then slowly faded as the riders passed by above. "Drowner's men?" Amanda whispered when the sounds had gone. "Most likely." Luke peered out carefully. "They'll have split into search parties, covering as much ground as they can before dark." They waited another 15 minutes before continuing, Luke choosing their path with extra care. Now. The short winter day was already fading when he found a suitable campsite, a deep overhang in the cliff face, sheltered from wind and hidden from casual view by a stand of juniper. "We'll stay close to the rock tonight," he said, helping Amanda dismount. "No fire until full dark, and then just enough to warm some coffee. They made camp efficiently, speaking little. Luke spread blankets in the deepest part of the overhang, while Amanda tended to Hope. The baby fussed quietly, but settled once fed. In the growing darkness, Luke allowed himself a small fire, feeding it with dry twigs that produced minimal smoke. Their evening meal was simple: jerky, hard biscuits, and hot coffee. Amanda ate one-handed, Hope sleeping against her shoulder. The firelight caught the worry in her eyes as she stared into the darkness beyond their shelter. "Get some rest," Luke said softly. "I'll take first watch." Amanda nodded gratefully and settled onto the blankets with Hope. Soon her breathing evened out into sleep, one arm curled protectively around the infant. Luke sat with his back to the rock, rifle across his knees. The quarter moon cast weak silver light across the landscape below their position. In the distance, coyotes called to each other, their yips echoing off the cliffs. He tried not to think about the hoofbeats he occasionally heard carrying on the night air, focusing instead on the peaceful sound of Amanda and Hope's quiet breathing behind him. The night deepened. Stars wheeled overhead, bright and cold. Luke remained motionless, watching and listening, guardian of this small, fragile family that fate had unexpectedly placed in his care. Frost glittered on their blankets in the pre-dawn darkness. Luke moved silently between the sleeping forms of Amanda and Hope, touching Amanda's shoulder gently to wake her. Her eyes opened instantly, alert despite the early hour. "Time to move," he whispered. "Want to be gone before first light?" Amanda nodded, carefully gathering Hope close as she sat up. The baby stirred but didn't cry, already learning the quiet ways of life on the run. Luke shook the frost from their blankets while Amanda tended to Hope's needs, his movements efficient in the dim starlight. They ate cold biscuits from yesterday's supplies, washing them down with water from Luke's canteen. The horse's breath made white clouds in the cold air as Luke saddled it, checking and double-checking the cinch. "Riders might circle back once day breaks," he explained quietly, helping Amanda mount. "Best we put some distance between us and yesterday's trail." The sky was just beginning to pale when they left the shelter of the overhang. Luke led them east, away from the cliffs, choosing paths where the frozen ground would hold few tracks. Hope dozed in her sling, lulled by the gentle motion of the horse. As morning brightened the landscape, Luke's concern grew. The terrain was opening up, rolling hills covered in winter-brown grass, scattered, pinyon pines offering less cover than he'd like. He kept them moving at a steady pace, eyes constantly scanning the horizon for dust or movement. "Clouds building up," Amanda noted, looking at the gray masses gathering in the northern sky. Luke nodded. "Snow coming. Might work in our favor. Cover our tracks, make searching harder." He adjusted their course slightly, angling northeast. "There's a Navajo camp in these foothills. Traded with them some years back. Good people, especially the old silversmith and his wife." Amanda shifted in the saddle, trying to ease her stiff muscles. 2 days of riding had left her sore in ways she'd never imagined, but she pressed her lips together, determined not to complain. The baby's safety mattered more than her comfort. "Will they help us?" she asked instead. "Can't say for certain," Luke replied honestly. "But they're no friends to men like Drowner. Mining companies have tried pushing into their grazing lands more than once." The morning wore on. The clouds thickened overhead, turning the sunlight weak and diffuse. Hope woke hungry, and they paused briefly in the shelter of a grove for Amanda to feed her. Luke used the stop to check their back trail, satisfied when he saw no sign of pursuit. After noon, they came upon the burned remains of a homestead. Blackened logs thrust up from the snow like broken teeth. The roof had collapsed inward, and the small barn was nothing but ash and char. Amanda drew in a sharp breath at the sight. "How long ago?" she asked softly. Luke studied the ruins as they passed. 6 months, maybe less. Family here refused to sell when the mining company wanted their water rights. He didn't need to say more. The charred timbers told the rest of the story. Amanda's arms tightened around Hope. "I won't let them have her," she said fiercely. "I won't let wicked men destroy another life for profit." Luke glanced back at her, seeing the steel in her spine despite her weariness. "No," he agreed quietly. "We won't." They pushed on through the afternoon. The terrain grew more varied. Deep arroyos cutting through the hills, stands of juniper offering better cover. Luke chose their path carefully, using the landscape to hide their movement while keeping watch for signs of the camp he remembered. The sun was low in the west when they entered a narrow valley, its walls rising gentle but high on either side. Luke slowed their pace, watching the slopes intently. There, a thin trace of smoke rising against the gray sky, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. He raised his hand, bringing them to a stop. Taking a deep breath, he called out in carefully practiced Navajo, announcing their presence and peaceful intentions. His voice echoed slightly off the valley walls. Silence answered for several long moments. Then movement caught his eye, a figure rising from behind a rocky outcrop, bow drawn and arrow nocked. The warrior held his position, studying them intently. Luke remained still, hands open and visible. He called out again, using the name he was known by among the Navajo. "Mountain Shadow who trades fair." After another tense moment, the warrior lowered his bow slightly, recognition crossing his face. "Luke who trades," the man called back in accented English. "It has been many seasons." "Too many, friend," Luke answered. "We seek shelter, if the people are willing." The warrior gestured to unseen others, and 2 more guards appeared on the slopes. After a brief exchange in Navajo, the first man waved them forward. "Come, the elders will hear you." They moved slowly up the valley, the guards falling in around them, not threatening but watchful. Amanda sat straight in the saddle despite her exhaustion, one hand pressed protectively over Hope's sleeping form. Luke walked beside them, alert but hopeful. The valley opened into a wider space where several hogans stood in the traditional circle. Smoke rose from their central holes, carrying the scent of pinyon pine. Children stopped their play to stare at the strangers. Women paused in their work, and several men moved to gather near the largest hogan. Luke recognized the old silversmith, Nez, standing with quiet dignity among them. The years had added more silver to his hair, but his eyes were as sharp as ever as they assessed the newcomers. Beside him stood his wife, Alani, her face weathered but kind, as she noted Amanda's obvious fatigue and the bundle she carried. The moment hung balanced between welcome and rejection. Luke offered a silent prayer that these good people would extend their protection to his unexpected companions. Amanda's hands trembled slightly on the reins, but her back remained straight as she faced whatever judgment awaited them. The morning sun painted the red rocks gold as it climbed above the eastern horizon. Inside Nez and Alani's hogan, Amanda stirred on her sleeping pallet, warmed by the dying embers of the night's fire. Her eyes found Hope immediately, peaceful in the beautifully woven cradleboard that Alani had provided. The baby's tiny face was serene in sleep, one small fist curled near her cheek. Alani was already up, her silver-streaked hair neat in its traditional bun as she quietly stoked the fire. She smiled at Amanda, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening with genuine warmth. "The little one slept well," she said softly in careful English. A good sign. Luke ducked through the doorway, bringing the crisp morning air with him. He had spent the night in the men's hogan, respecting Navajo customs. His expression was serious as he settled cross-legged near the fire, accepting a cup of coffee from Alani with a murmured thanks. "I need to explain why we're here," he said, looking between Nez and Alani. The older couple sat quietly, ready to listen. Luke kept his words simple and direct. "The baby is in danger. A powerful mining baron wants her hidden away. Amanda saved her from being sold off, taken from her real mother who died trying to protect her." Nez's weathered face remained calm, but his dark eyes showed understanding. "The strong often think they can buy and sell the weak," he said, "even their own blood." His gaze went to Hope, who was beginning to wake with tiny, stretching movements. "We've seen such men's greed before," Alani added, her voice carrying decades of witnessed injustice. She watched as Amanda went to lift Hope from the cradle board. "The child needs protection, and this young woman showed great courage." "She did," Luke agreed, his eyes following Amanda's gentle movements with the baby. "But the man hunting them has money, and men. We're asking a lot, sheltering them." Nez and Alani exchanged a long look, years of marriage allowing them to communicate without words. Finally, Nez spoke. "Our people know about children being taken, about powerful men who think they can erase truth with gold." He nodded slowly. "You may stay, as long as needed. The people will protect you." Amanda's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "We won't forget this kindness." Later that morning, the camp's respected midwife came to examine Hope. Her capable hands moved gently over the baby, checking reflexes and strength. "A healthy child," she pronounced with satisfaction, "born under a strong star." She touched Hope's forehead softly. "I name her Dawn, child, for she brings new light." She spoke a blessing in Navajo, her words carrying the weight of generations. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm of simple tasks and quiet moments. Amanda found herself drawn into the women's daily work, watching carefully as Alani demonstrated the proper way to grind corn between stone metats. The repetitive motion was soothing, and the older woman's patient instruction helped Amanda feel less like an outsider. "Like this," Alani would say, adjusting Amanda's grip or angle. "Let the stone do the work." Other women would smile encouragement as they worked nearby, some humming traditional songs that made Hope wave her tiny fists in delight. Luke spent his days helping with the camp's needs, his strength welcome as they repaired winter damage to the horse corral. The sound of his hammer echoed off the red rocks as he worked alongside the Navajo men, communication flowing through shared labor more than words. Children darted through the camp like bright birds, their laughter carrying on the clear air. They were fascinated by Hope, gathering around her cradle board to coo and gentle finger wave at her. Amanda noticed how they always positioned themselves to block the wind from the baby's face, natural protectors in miniature. In the evenings, Luke and Amanda would take turns walking with Hope, pacing slow circles around the central fire pit while she fussed or simply needed movement. Their conversations flowed easier in the gathering darkness, voices kept low to match the night's quiet. "Did you ever think you'd end up here?" Amanda asked on the second night, Hope drowsing, against her shoulder. "Helping a washerwoman and a stolen baby?" Luke was silent for a moment, watching the flames dance. "Never planned it," he admitted, "but sometimes the Lord puts people in your path for a reason." "Do you really believe that?" Her voice held both hope and doubt. "Starting to," he said softly. "Starting to believe a lot of things again." On the third evening, they sat side by side near the fire, Hope sleeping peacefully between them. Amanda noticed how Luke's expression had grown more troubled throughout the day, his eyes frequently scanning the horizon. "What is it?" she asked, though she feared she knew. Luke sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Been too quiet. Drowner won't give up easy, not with what that journal proves. Need to know what he's planning." He met her worried gaze. "There's a small agency town half a day's ride from here. Might hear news, get some sense of where his men are searching." Amanda's hands tightened in her skirts. "It's dangerous." "Staying blind is dangerous too." He touched Hope's tiny hand gently. "Need to know what we're facing." They discussed it late into the night, weighing risks against necessity. In the end, they both knew he was right. As the first hint of dawn touched the sky, Luke prepared to ride out. Amanda stood watching as he saddled his horse, hope warm against her chest in the morning chill. "I'll be back by tomorrow night," he promised, checking his rifle one last time. "Nez's people will keep you safe till then." He hesitated, then reached out to touch Hope's downy head. "Both of you. Just be careful," Amanda said softly. "We'll be waiting." The sun climbed higher as Luke mounted up, painting long shadows across the red earth. Amanda watched until he disappeared around the valley's bend, Hope making small mourning noises against her shoulder. Behind her, smoke rose from the hogans as the camp began its day, the simple rhythm of life continuing despite the weight of worry in her heart. The morning air bit sharp and clean as Luke guided his horse down the winding trail away from the Navajo camp. Behind him, thin wisps of cooking smoke rose straight up in the still air, marking the peaceful valley he'd left behind. Amanda and Hope would be safe there, at least for now, protected by people who understood too well the cost of powerful men's greed. His breath frosted in small clouds as he rode, the horse's hooves crunching through patches of lingering snow. The sun climbed slowly, painting the red rocks in shades of amber and gold, but bringing little warmth. Luke kept to lesser-used paths, staying alert for any sign of other riders. By mid-morning, the landscape began to change. The dramatic cliffs and mesas gave way to more rolling country, dotted with scrub pine and sage. In the distance, he could make out the faint scar of the railroad grade cutting across the land. His jaw tightened at the sight. The iron rails brought change with them, some good, some terrible, and men like Drowner knew how to profit from both kinds. The sun stood high overhead when he finally rode into the settlement of Copper Creek. It wasn't much of a town yet, just a cluster of wooden buildings strung along the railroad line, anchored by the Indian Agency office, general store, and depot. A few horses stood tied outside the store, their riders inside escaping the cold. Luke dismounted stiffly and secured his horse to the hitching rail. He could hear voices from inside the store, men talking freely in the warmth. Rather than enter immediately, he made a show of adjusting his saddle, ears trained on the conversation drifting through the thin walls. $500 reward, one voice was saying. "Dead or alive for the woman, but the baby's got to be brought back safe. Drowner's offering it personal-like." "500? Another voice whistled low. "Must be some special baby." "Don't matter why," a third man cut in. "That kind of money, every gun hand between here and the territorial line will be looking." Luke's hands tightened on the saddle leather. $500 was more than most men saw in a year. It would draw hunters like wolves to meat, the kind who wouldn't ask questions as long as the pay was good. He straightened up and pushed through the store's door, letting his eyes adjust to the dimmer light inside. 3 men stood near the potbelly stove, warming their hands and trading news. They gave him the quick once-over that strangers got in such places, then returned to their conversation. Luke nodded briefly to the storekeeper and began gathering supplies, ammunition for his rifle, coffee, hard bread. He kept his movements unhurried as he listened. "Railroad man's in town too," one of the men by the stove continued. "Been meeting with Drowner's people all week about them water rights up valley. Heard they're bringing some fancy Eastern folks through soon," another added, "showing off the investment opportunities like." Luke carefully added several yards of sturdy cloth to his purchases. Amanda would need warmer clothes if they had to keep moving. The storekeeper wrapped everything in brown paper, not bothering with conversation beyond stating the price. Outside again, Luke secured his supplies and led his horse toward the depot. The railroad agent would be there, most likely. Men like that stayed close to the telegraph office, keeping their Eastern masters informed of every development. The depot was a plain wooden building with a fresh coat of paint, the only real sign of prosperity in the dusty settlement. Luke found a spot in the shade of a stack of railroad ties, close enough to hear but out of easy sight. He wasn't disappointed. 2 men stood at the corner of the platform, one in an Eastern-cut suit that marked him as the railroad agent, the other wearing the rough clothes and gun of a mining camp foreman. Their voices carried clearly in the cold air. "Time's getting short," the foreman was saying. "Them investors will be here in less than 2 weeks. Boss wants everything settled proper before then." The agent's voice was smooth, practiced. "Then Mr. Drowner needs to focus on our agreement. The railroad requires clear title to those water rights. Family complications would be unfortunate at this stage." "We'll recover the asset," the foreman assured him. "Got men watching every trail, every town. Can't hide a baby forever." Luke's stomach turned at how they spoke of hope, not as a child, but as a thing to be possessed. He waited until the men moved away, then made his way to the telegraph office. The operator looked bored, barely glancing up from his newspaper. Luke kept his message simple, using the name John Smith. "To Territorial Marshal's Office, evidence of child trafficking and murder at Drowner's mining camp. Witness testimony and written proof exist. Multiple victims. Requires immediate investigation." He paid the fee and walked out, knowing the telegraph's clicks would carry seeds of truth to men who could act on them. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a legal thread that might help unravel Drowner's carefully woven plans. The sun was sinking toward the horizon as Luke made his final purchases: more ammunition, dried beef, and an extra blanket. The temperature was dropping fast as he rode out of town, taking a different trail than the one he'd arrived on. Darkness caught him still several hours from the Navajo camp. He made a small fire in a sheltered hollow, eating cold bread and beef while his horse cropped what grass it could find. The stars wheeled overhead, sharp and bright in the winter sky. Luke thought of Amanda and Hope, safe in the warm hogan, and felt the distance between them like a physical ache. He dozed fitfully, waking at every sound. Well before dawn, he was up and saddling his horse, eager to close the miles between them. The first gray light of morning revealed a broken landscape of shadow and stone. Luke pushed the pace as much as he dared on the treacherous trail. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when he saw it. 3 thin columns of smoke rising in the distance, too close to the Navajo Valley for comfort. His heart clenched. Smoke could mean many things: campfires, signal fires, or something far worse. He reined in his horse, studying the horizon intently. The smoke rose straight up in the still morning air, dark against the pale sky. Whatever made those fires, he had a feeling their peaceful days of shelter were coming to an end. The morning sun cast long shadows as Luke urged his horse forward, following the familiar trail back to the Navajo camp. His muscles were tense, his mind racing with everything he'd learned in town. The weight of Drowner's $500 reward and the railroad's scheming pressed on him like a physical burden. More smoke columns appeared as he crested a rise, making his heart skip. But as he drew closer, the familiar sense of pinyon wood and cooking fires reached him. He could see people moving about their daily tasks, women carrying water, children playing, men tending horses. The smoke wasn't from raiders or destruction, just the ordinary business of camp life and winter preparation. His horse's hooves crunched on frozen ground as he approached. Amanda stood near Nez and Alani's Hogan, Hope bundled securely in her arms. The sight of them safe made something tight in his chest loosen. Amanda's face brightened when she saw him, though worry lines creased her forehead. "You're back," she said simply, but relief colored her voice. Luke dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. "Promised I would be." Nez emerged from the Hogan, followed by Alani. They greeted Luke with dignified nods, but he could see the question in their eyes. They knew he brought news from town. "Come inside," Alani said, gesturing toward the Hogan's door. "Share what you have learned." The interior was warm and dim, smelling of cedar and sage. They settled around the small fire, Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradleboard. Luke accepted a cup of tea from Alani before speaking. "Drowner's offering $500 for the baby's return," he began, watching Amanda's face pale. "And for your capture, dead or alive." Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled Hope's blanket higher. That's more money than most men see in a year." "There's more," Luke continued. "Railroad's involved now. They're agents in town, pressing Drowner about water rights and land deals. They've got Eastern investors coming in less than 2 weeks. Seems they want everything settled proper before then." He paused, meeting Amanda's eyes. "They're calling Hope an asset that needs recovering." Nez's weathered face grew grave. "The railroad brings many changes, not all good." "I sent a telegram to the territorial marshal," Luke added. "Didn't use real names, but told them about the trafficking and murder at Drowner's camp. Said there was proof and witnesses." Amanda's hand went instinctively to her petticoat, where the dead maid's journal was sewn. "Will they investigate?" "Maybe. If they do, it'll take time. Time we might not have." The elders exchanged looks. Nez spoke first. "We must decide whether to stay or move camp. Drowner's men will keep searching, and now others will join them, hungry for reward money." "Some families were already planning to move higher into the hills for winter gathering," Alani added. "Perhaps we should all go sooner." They discussed options as the afternoon light faded. Finally, they agreed. The camp would begin breaking apart at first light. Some families would head into the high country, others would scatter to different valleys. Harder to track, harder to find. As darkness fell, people moved quietly through the camp, packing what they could, preparing for morning. Luke helped where he was needed, but his eyes kept finding Amanda. She looked tired, worried, but determined. Later, after Hope was settled for the night, Luke and Amanda sat just outside the Hogan's door. The lamplight from inside cast their shadows long across the ground. Stars pricked through the darkening sky above them. "I keep thinking," Amanda said softly, "about how strange life is. A few weeks ago, I was just a washerwoman in a mining camp. Now—" She glanced at him. "Now you and Hope are all the family I have in the world." Luke's chest tightened. He wasn't good with words, especially about feelings. But something in him had changed these past weeks, watching Amanda with the baby, seeing her strength and gentleness. "Reckon sometimes family is what you choose," he said carefully, "not just what you're born to." Amanda's eyes shimmered in the dim light. She understood what he wasn't quite saying, that he felt it too, this growing bond between them. Before turning in, Amanda checked her petticoat by lamplight, fingers finding the familiar bulk of the sewn-in journal. The pages that detailed Drowner's crimes were still safe, still hidden. She said a silent prayer of thanks before lying down near Hope's cradleboard. The camp settled into darkness. Luke took first watch, rifle across his knees, listening to the night sounds. Wind in the pines, an owl's distant call, the soft breathing of those sleeping in the hogan behind him. It was deep in the night when the dogs began barking, sharp, alarmed sounds that cut through the quiet. Luke was on his feet instantly, rifle ready. But before he could shout a warning, gunshots exploded from the darkness. "Raiders!" someone yelled. More shots followed. Luke fired toward muzzle flashes, trying to give people time to run. He heard screaming, horses whinnying, the thud of running feet. Amanda appeared in the Hogan's doorway, clutching Hope. "Get to the rocks," he shouted to her. "I'll hold them." Something hard struck the back of his head. Pain exploded through his skull. He stumbled, tried to turn, but his legs wouldn't work right. Through blurring vision, he saw shapes moving in the firelight, men dragging Amanda toward waiting horses. Hope was wailing. "Luke!" Amanda's desperate cry reached him as darkness crept in from the edges. Then everything went black. The last thing he heard was hoofbeats fading into the night, taking Amanda and Hope away from him. Gray light crept over the mountains as Luke's eyes flickered open. His head throbbed with each heartbeat, and the snow beneath him was stained crimson. The bitter metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. For a moment, he could only lie there, trying to piece together what had happened. The camp was eerily quiet now. Where there had been screams and gunfire, only the soft moans of the wounded remained. Smoke from dying fires drifted through the cold morning air, mixing with the sharper scent of gunpowder. Luke pushed himself to his knees, fighting a wave of dizziness. His vision swam, then steadied. The raid came back to him in flashes, the dogs barking, Amanda's cry, Hope's wails. He touched the back of his head and winced at the sticky wetness there. "Be still," a familiar voice said. Alani knelt beside him, her weathered face lined with exhaustion and grief. "You took a hard blow." "Amanda," Luke's voice was rough. "The baby?" "Taken." Alani pressed a cloth wet with snow against his wound. "Toward Coldwater, we think. They rode fast, not caring if their horses lasted." Luke forced himself to look around the camp. His stomach clenched at what he saw. Overturned cooking pots, scattered belongings, torn tent canvas flapping in the wind. 2 still forms lay covered with blankets near the center of the camp. Not everyone had survived the night. Nez approached, his normally straight shoulders bent with sorrow. 3 more are wounded but will live. My brother's grandson among them. "I have to go after them," Luke said, struggling to his feet. The world tilted alarmingly, but he stayed upright through sheer will. "You can barely stand," Alani protested. "Does not matter." Luke took a careful step, then another. "Every hour gives them more lead." A younger man emerged from a nearby hogan, his face set in hard lines. Luke recognized him as Tony, one of the camp's best hunters. "My son lies inside with an arrow wound," he said quietly. "I will ride with you." Luke started to object, but Tony raised his hand. "No. What they did here, it cannot go unanswered, and you will not make it far alone, not with that head wound." There was truth in that. Luke nodded carefully, mindful of his throbbing skull. "Much obliged." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. While some tended the wounded, others helped Luke and Tony gather supplies. Alani cleaned and wrapped Luke's head wound as best she could, then pressed a small pouch of herbs into his hand. "For pain," she explained. "Mix with water when you can." They paused only long enough to help bury the dead. 2 men who had tried to protect their families. The bodies were laid in shallow graves, marked with stones. Nez spoke quietly in Navajo, promising to return for proper ceremonies when time allowed. By mid-morning, Luke and Tony were mounted and ready. Luke's horse had survived the raid, though his saddlebags had been partially looted. They carried what ammunition remained, dried meat and water skins. The morning sun cast long shadows as they followed the raiders' trail away from the devastated camp. The tracks were easy to read. Too easy. The raiders had not bothered to hide their passing, confident in their numbers and head start. Deep hoofprints marred the snow, and spent cartridge cases glinted here and there, brass winking in the winter light. They rode steadily but not recklessly, knowing their horses would be needed for whatever lay ahead. Luke's head pounded with each hoofbeat, but he forced himself to focus on the trail, on staying upright in the saddle. Tony rode slightly ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain. The sun climbed higher, burning away patches of snow and making the remaining ice glitter. They stopped only once, around midday, at a half-frozen creek. While the horses drank from holes broken in the ice, the 2 men shared strips of jerky in silence. Luke chewed mechanically, not tasting the meat, his thoughts fixed on Amanda and Hope. "They are alive," Tony said suddenly, as if reading Luke's mind. "Drowner wants the child whole, and he will want the woman to suffer before he kills her." It was cold comfort, but Luke nodded. "How is your boy?" "Strong. He will heal." Tony's face softened slightly. "His mother tends him well." They mounted up again, following the trail as it wound down through rocky draws and sparse pine forest. Luke's vision blurred occasionally, but he blinked it clear each time, refusing to give in to the injury. The herb tea Alani had given him helped somewhat, though the pain never fully receded. As afternoon faded toward evening, lights began to glimmer far below, cold water, spreading out along the valley floor. Luke's horse stumbled slightly on the descent, and he grabbed the saddle horn to steady himself. The motion sent fresh pain shooting through his skull. "You cannot go on much longer," Tony observed quietly. "Have to," Luke muttered, but he knew the other man was right. He could barely stay mounted, and his thoughts were becoming dangerously foggy. They paused in a sheltered draw about a mile from town. In the gathering darkness, Luke forced his mind to work. They needed information before they could act, needed to know where Drowner was keeping Amanda and Hope. "The compound," he said finally. "North edge of town. Big house, stables, guardhouse. That's where they'll be." He took a careful breath. "I need you to scout it. Watch the guards, count them, find out which buildings they're watching closest." Tony nodded, understanding. "And you?" "There's a church. Small place, but the preacher's a good man. Might help us." Luke tried to smile, but managed only a grimace. "Reckon I'd better get there before I fall off this horse." They separated at the edge of town, Tony melting into the shadows, while Luke guided his tired horse down the main street. The church stood at the far end, its weathered cross barely visible in the deepening dark. No light showed in the windows, but Luke knew Preacher Miller often worked late, reading or writing his sermons. Luke all but fell from the saddle, catching himself against the church wall. Each step toward the door was a battle against unconsciousness. Finally, he reached the handle and stumbled inside. The interior was dim, lit only by a single lamp on the preacher's desk. Josiah Miller looked up, startled, then jumped to his feet as Luke collapsed onto the nearest pew. "Luke? Good Lord, what's happened to you?" The preacher's concerned face swam in Luke's darkening vision. He forced out the words he needed to say before the darkness could take him. "Amanda, the baby, Drowner has them. Need your help." Then consciousness slipped away, and Luke knew nothing more. Lamplight flickered against the church's rough-hewn walls as preacher Josiah Miller pressed a cool cloth to Luke's head wound. The elderly widow, Mrs. Harlan, stirred a pot of beef broth hanging over the small stove in the corner, her movements quick and practiced. The simple one-room church felt safe, a haven from the growing darkness outside. "This needs proper cleaning," Preacher Miller said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Martha, would you fetch my medical kit? It's in the vestry cabinet." Mrs. Harlan set down her wooden spoon and hurried to get the supplies. Her gray hair was neatly pinned back, her plain dress speaking of practical frontier life. She returned with a worn leather bag that had seen many similar emergencies. "Hold still now," she instructed, taking over from the preacher with capable hands. She began cleaning the wound with carbolic solution, her touch gentle but firm. "That's quite a knock you took. You're fortunate it wasn't worse." Luke winced but didn't pull away. The throbbing in his head had dulled somewhat since his collapse earlier, though moving too quickly still made the room spin. "Much obliged," he managed. "When you're ready," Preacher Miller said, settling onto a nearby pew. "We need to hear the whole story. Something mighty troubling must have happened to bring you to us in such a state." Mrs. Harlan finished bandaging Luke's head and moved to check on her broth. She ladled some into a tin cup and brought it to Luke. "Drink this first. You need strength before telling tales." Luke accepted the cup gratefully, letting the warm liquid ease his dry throat. The simple broth helped clear his mind. He took a deep breath, knowing these good people deserved the full truth. "It started about 2 weeks back," he began, "when I found a woman near frozen in the snow." His voice grew stronger as he recounted finding Amanda, discovering the hidden baby, and learning the terrible truth about Silas Drowner's operation. "She stole that child to save it," Luke explained, careful to keep his voice low despite their relative privacy. "The baby's mother was a housemaid in Drowner's employ. He had her killed to hide his sin, but not before she left evidence of his crimes." Preacher Miller's normally gentle face hardened. "The Lord sees all such wickedness, even when earthly justice fails." "My niece," Mrs. Harlan said suddenly, her hands twisting in her apron. "She worked in that camp last year. Said she was expecting, but then—" She swallowed hard. "They told us she died of fever, lost the baby too. I never believed it." Luke reached out to grasp her weathered hand. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Truly." She squared her shoulders, grief turning to determination. "What can we do to help?" "Drowner has them both now, Amanda and the baby. Took them in a raid on the Navajo camp that sheltered us." Luke's jaw tightened at the memory. "Good people died protecting us." "He's gone too far," Preacher Miller said quietly. "Many here resent his grip on this town, controlling water rights, keeping wages low, buying off any lawman who might question his dealings. But fear keeps folks quiet." "Sometimes the Lord calls us to stand against evil," Mrs. Harlan said firmly, "even when we're afraid." The preacher nodded. "I'll speak with some trusted souls tomorrow, quietly, mind you. The blacksmith, Jeff Turner, he lost his water rights to Drowner's lawyers last spring. And the Whitman brothers who run the general store. Their pa stood up to Drowner once, paid dearly for it." "Rest now," Mrs. Harlan told Luke, seeing his exhaustion. "We'll make up a proper cot for you here in the church. It's the last place Drowner's men would look." Luke wanted to protest, to act immediately, but his body betrayed him. The combination of injury, worry, and relief at finding allies pulled him toward sleep. He allowed Mrs. Harlan to help him to a narrow cot in the corner, where he drifted into uneasy dreams of Amanda's face and hopes crying. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Luke woke to find his head clearer, though still tender. Mrs. Harlan had returned with fresh bread and coffee, her quiet efficiency a blessing. While Luke ate, Preacher Miller donned his coat. "I'll make my rounds," he said. "Visit some folks who might be sympathetic to our cause. The Lord's work takes many forms, and sometimes justice needs more than prayers." Throughout the day, Luke forced himself to rest, knowing he'd need his strength. He spent hours in prayer, something he hadn't done properly since losing his wife years ago. He prayed for Amanda's safety, for baby Hope's protection, for guidance in what was to come. Tony slipped into the church as afternoon shadows lengthened, moving like a ghost. He reported that Drowner's compound was well guarded, with armed men watching all approaches. But he had seen Amanda through a window, alive though clearly confined. The baby too, he thought, judging by the presence of a cradle. "They are in the main house," Tony said. "Second floor, north side. 4 guards outside, more inside. Dogs in the yard." Luke absorbed this information, adding it to his mental map of the compound from his own past observations. Every detail might matter when the time came. As evening approached, people began arriving at the church in 1s and 2s, trying not to draw attention. Jeff Turner, the blacksmith, his massive arms crossed over his chest as he listened to Luke's story. The Whitman brothers, faces tight with old anger at Drowner's abuse of power. 3 ranchers Luke didn't know, but whose weathered faces spoke of hard work and harder choices. Mrs. Harlan sat near the front, her spine straight as a rifle barrel. Preacher Miller closed the church door and lit extra lamps. In their warm glow, he addressed the gathered group. "Friends," he began, "we're here tonight because evil has gone unchecked too long in our community. The Lord tells us there is a time for peace and a time for action. I believe that time has come." Luke stood carefully, his head steady enough now to manage it. "I'm not asking for violence," he said, "but I need help to save an innocent woman and child from a man who treats people like property." Jeff Turner spat into his bandana. "Drowner's had this coming a long while. My family nearly starved when he dammed up our creek last year." The older Whitman brother nodded. "Our pa died of a hunting accident 3 days after refusing to sell our store. Weren't no accident, we all knew it." One by one, they shared their stories. Lost land, suspicious deaths, broken promises. The weight of Drowner's crimes filled the small church like a thundercloud. Even those who had escaped direct harm had witnessed enough to know change was needed. "What's your plan?" the youngest rancher asked finally. Luke looked at each face in turn, seeing resolve replace fear. "First, we need to know who in town might stand with Drowner, who can't be trusted." "The sheriff," someone said immediately. "Drowner pays him regular." "The station master, too," added another voice. "And that new banker." Mrs. Harlan spoke up from her pew. "The washerwoman's circle meets tomorrow. I can learn which house servants might help us, which ones belong to him." Tony, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "I will watch the compound. Learn their patterns when guards change, where they are weakest." Preacher Miller raised his hands. "We must be wise as serpents, gentle as doves. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice, about protecting the innocent." The group nodded solemnly. Luke felt hope rising in his chest for the first time since the raid. These weren't gunfighters or outlaws, just good people who had finally been pushed too far. "We'll need to move carefully," Luke said, "but together with the Lord's help, we might just have a chance." One by one, they clasped hands or exchanged quiet words of commitment before slipping out into the night. Soon, only Luke, Tony, the preacher, and Mrs. Harlan remained in the lamplit church. "Get some rest," Preacher Miller told Luke. "Tomorrow we begin gathering what we need. The Lord didn't bring you to us by accident." As Luke settled back onto his cot, he thought of Amanda and Hope, locked away in Drowner's house. "Hold on," he whispered into the darkness. "Help is coming." Outside, a cold wind swept down from the mountains, rattling the church windows. But inside, the warmth of shared purpose and growing hope kept the shadows at bay. Dawn broke cold and gray over Coldwater. Luke winced as he tightened his horse's cinch, his head wound still tender beneath fresh bandages. Around him, 4 determined townsmen readied their own mounts, while Tony checked his rifle with practiced hands. No one spoke much. The weight of what lay ahead pressed heavy on them all. Jeff Turner, the blacksmith, led them away from town on a roundabout path that avoided the main roads. His massive frame looked strange on horseback, but he sat his mount well enough. The Whitman brothers rode close together, their usual cheerful manner replaced by grim focus. The youngest rancher, Tom Hayes, brought up the rear, scanning constantly for followers. They reached the low bluff overlooking Drowner's compound just as the sun burned through morning haze. Luke stretched out on his belly beside Tony, studying the sprawling operation below through the Navajo scout's brass spyglass. The compound spread across several acres, dominated by the 2-story main house where Drowner lived. Its white-painted walls and green trim spoke of Eastern pretension. A mansion dropped incongruously into frontier dust. To the right stood the long, low bunkhouse where his hired men slept. Left of the main house, a small office building squatted near the corrals. Beyond it all, the mine's processing buildings belched black smoke that stained the sky. "Like a spider's web," Tom Hayes muttered. "Everything connected, everything under his control." Tony nodded toward the main house. "The woman and child are there, 2nd floor, north side. I saw them moved in last night. 2 guards, 1 maid carrying the baby." Luke's hands tightened on the spyglass. "Amanda? Was she hurt?" "She walked on her own," Tony said. "Head high, proud woman." That eased Luke's mind somewhat. If Amanda could still show defiance, she hadn't been broken. And if she was in the main house rather than locked in some shed, perhaps Drowner meant to keep up appearances, at least for now. They watched through the morning as the compound came to life. Miners trudged toward the processing buildings in groups of 2 and 3. A wagon delivered supplies to the kitchen door. Guards changed shifts with casual precision. 4 men always visible on patrol, others surely inside. "Look there," Jeff Turner whispered, pointing. "When that processing steam hits the guard post, they can't see worth spit." He was right. Every hour or so, the wind shifted and drove white clouds of steam across the compound. The guards would turn their faces away, squinting against the moisture. "And here," added Ben Whitman, the younger brother, "supply wagon comes through at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, regular as clockwork. Gates open wide, everyone distracted." Luke noted each detail, building a mental map of routines and weaknesses. The compound wasn't a fortress. It was designed to impress investors and intimidate workers, not repel a determined attack. Still, there were enough armed men to make any direct assault suicidal. Around midday, they saw Amanda briefly at an upstairs window. Even from this distance, Luke recognized her straight-backed posture. She stood there perhaps a minute before a guard ushered her away. No sign of hope, but a white-aproned maid had carried what looked like a bundle of baby clothes into the house earlier. "Storm's coming," Tom Hayes said suddenly, studying the sky to the west. He had spent 30 years ranching these hills. He knew the weather's moods. "Big one, by the feel. Day after tomorrow, I reckon." Luke exchanged looks with Tony. Bad weather meant poor visibility, confused routines, distracted guards. It might be exactly what they needed. They watched until late afternoon, then rode back to town in smaller groups to avoid notice. The church was dark and quiet when they slipped inside. Preacher Miller and Mrs. Harlan waited with coffee and bread, while other supporters arrived quietly through the back door. "What news from town?" Luke asked the preacher as they gathered around the front pews. "The washerwoman's circle proved useful," Mrs. Harlan answered instead. "2 of Drowner's housemaids have sick relatives in my sewing group. They'll help if they can. They've seen too much to stay loyal to him." Preacher Miller nodded. "And I spoke with the telegraph operator. He's willing to delay any messages from Drowner's office when the time comes." "Good," Luke said, "because I think I know how we might do this." He laid out his plan simply. He would ride in alone, unarmed and appearing defeated. He would claim to have information about others who helped Amanda steal the baby, information he would trade for her freedom. "Drowner's proud," Luke explained. "He'll want to hear me beg, want to make an example of me. He'll have me brought to the main house." Jeff Turner frowned. "Mighty risky. His men could just shoot you." "No," Tom Hayes said slowly. "Luke's right. Drowner will want to break him first, show everyone what happens to those who cross him. Man like that needs an audience for his cruelty." Luke continued. "I'll keep him talking until the storm hits. When I throw my hat down, that's the signal. Jeff and the Whitmans take the guards at the gate. Tony and Tom cover the bunkhouse with their rifles, keep the rest of his men pinned down. Mrs. Harlan's friends inside create what confusion they can. The rest of you wait mounted behind the processing buildings until you see my signal." "And then?" someone asked. "Then we get Amanda and Hope out. With witnesses to back up our story and that journal she carries, we can bring the territorial marshal down on Drowner proper and legal." Preacher Miller stood slowly. "It's a dangerous plan. Men could die." "Men have already died," Jeff Turner growled. "Good men, killed by Drowner's greed and cruelty." The preacher raised his hands. "I don't disagree. I only want us to be clear about what we're risking and why. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice, about protecting the innocent and bringing evil into the light." He moved to the altar and bowed his head. One by one, the others joined him. "Lord," Josiah prayed, his voice soft but firm, "we ask for your guidance and protection. Help us to act with courage and wisdom, to defend the weak and restore what was broken. Let justice flow like water, righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." "Amen," they whispered together. The group dispersed gradually as darkness fell, each man carrying his part of the plan. Soon only Luke remained in the church, sitting quietly in a front pew. Thunder rolled in the distance. The storm Tom Hayes had predicted was building in the high country. "I'm coming," Luke whispered, thinking of Amanda's proud stance at the window, of tiny hope in her stolen cradle. "Hold on. I won't lose you again." Outside, wind rattled the church windows, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The storm was gathering strength, like the resolve in Luke's heart. Tomorrow would bring preparation, and then justice or judgment, victory or defeat. But tonight, in the quiet church, he simply prayed and waited, letting peace settle over him like a familiar blanket. He touched his bandaged head, remembering Amanda's hands cleaning his wounds in the Navajo camp, her quiet strength as she cared for Hope. Somewhere in those few days of shared danger and tender moments, she had become more than just someone to protect. She had become family. And family, Luke knew deep in his bones, was worth any risk. The thunder growled again, closer now. Luke smiled slightly, hearing God's approval in its voice. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. Tonight was for prayer, for preparation, for trusting that light would eventually overcome darkness. Thunder echoed across the mountains as dark clouds gathered overhead. The afternoon light had turned an eerie yellow-gray, casting strange shadows across Drowner's mining compound. Luke Branham rode slowly up the main road, his borrowed horse picking its way carefully through the muddy ruts. His head still throbbed beneath its bandages, but he forced himself to appear even more weary and beaten than he felt. 2 guards stepped out from behind the gate posts, rifles raised. Luke kept his hands visible, his own hat held loosely in one palm. He swayed slightly in the saddle, playing up his injuries. "Hold it right there," the taller guard called. "State your business." "Come to see Mr. Drowner," Luke said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Got information he'll want to hear, about the woman and the baby." The guards exchanged glances. One kept his rifle trained on Luke while the other patted him down, removing his gun belt and checking for hidden weapons. Finding none, they grabbed the horse's reins and led Luke into the compound's central yard. Word of his arrival spread quickly. Miners paused in their work to watch, and ranch hands drifted closer from the corrals. Luke noted their positions without seeming to look, counting armed men, mapping distances. Everything had to be precise when the moment came. The main house door opened, and Silas Drowner himself emerged onto the wide porch. He was a tall man in an Eastern-cut suit, his silver hair neatly trimmed, but his eyes were cold as winter steel. 2 more guards flanked him, hands on their weapons. "Well, well," Drowner drawled. "The mountain man shows himself at last. Brought low by a mere woman and her lies, I see." Luke dismounted slowly, stumbling slightly. "No lies left now, sir. Just looking to make things right, for the right price." Drowner's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Bring them out," he called over his shoulder. A moment later, Amanda was led onto the porch by another guard. Her wrists were bound in front of her, but she held her head high, showing no fear. A round-faced maid followed, carrying Hope wrapped in a fine blanket. The baby was fussing, clearly unhappy with strange hands. Luke's heart clenched at the sight of them, but he kept his face carefully blank. He watched Amanda's eyes widen slightly as she took in his battered appearance. Then understanding flickered across her features as she caught his quick glance toward the surrounding hills. She gave no sign, but he knew she had understood. "Seems you've had quite a journey with these 2, Drowner said, descending the porch steps. "Tell me, what made you change your mind about harboring them?" Luke shrugged, letting bitterness enter his voice. "Woman brought nothing but trouble. Got good people killed with her crazy stories. I've got sense enough to know when to cut my losses." "Ah, yes, the Navajo camp." Drowner smiled that cold smile again. "Unfortunate, that business, but they should have known better than to shelter thieves and liars." Amanda's hands clenched, but she remained silent. The baby's fussing grew louder. "I figure," Luke continued, "there's reward money for returning what's yours. Enough maybe for a man to leave the territory, start fresh somewhere else. That's all I want now." "Is that so?" Drowner moved closer, studying Luke's face. "And what of the woman's wild accusations, her claims about my business dealings?" "Like I said, crazy stories." Luke spat in the dirt. "I've learned my lesson about believing tales from desperate women." Thunder rolled again, closer now. The storm was nearly overhead, just as they had planned. Luke could feel the electric tension in the air, matching the coiled readiness in his muscles. "Sarah," Drowner called to the maid, "bring the child here. Let's show our guest what all this fuss was about." The maid hurried forward with Hope, who was now crying in earnest. As she passed Amanda, something seemed to catch on Amanda's skirts. There was a slight tearing sound, and Amanda shifted her weight, using the movement to free something from her petticoat, the small, worn journal. "You want truth, Mr. Drowner?" Amanda's voice rang out clear and strong. "Here's truth in your own men's handwriting. Shall I read it for everyone to hear?" Drowner's face darkened. "Silence her," he snapped at the nearest guard. But Amanda had already begun to read, her voice shaking but determined. April 15th. Collected infant male from Sophie Carson after accident in mine shaft killed father. Payment of $50 recorded. Child transported east. By Mrs. D's arrangement. "I said silence her," Drowner roared. "June 3rd, Amanda continued, louder now. Female infant acquired from washhouse girl. Mother later found in creek, ruled suicide. Payment of $75 split with doctor." Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the shocked faces of the gathered workers. In that brilliant flash, Luke saw the truth hitting home. How many of them had lost children or loved ones to Drowner's schemes. August 20th, Amanda's voice rose above the thunder. Special case. Housemaid terminated after refusing terms. Infant female retained for Mrs. D's. "Enough!" Drowner bellowed. "Kill them both, and bring me that journal." Luke's hand moved to his hat. In the hills above, he knew rifles were being raised. Behind the processing buildings, horses stamped impatiently. The storm was directly overhead now, and justice was about to break like lightning. "No more killing," Luke said clearly. Then he flung his hat high into the air. Luke's hat spun through the air, dark against storm clouds. Before it hit the muddy ground, rifle shots cracked from the surrounding hills. Townsmen and Navajo riders rose like spirits from behind wagons, rocks, and sheds, their weapons trained on Drowner's men. "Drop your guns!" Preacher Josiah's voice boomed across the yard. "No one needs to die today." Several of Drowner's hired guns shifted uneasily, recognizing familiar faces among the attackers. Young Billy Thompson, now working as a guard, stared at his older brother Jim behind a rifle barrel. Will Carson, whose sister's baby had vanished last spring, leveled his shotgun at the compound's gates. "Think on your souls, boys," Luke called out. "You know what's been happening here." Two guards slowly lowered their weapons. Then another. But some of Drowner's most loyal men opened fire, sending bullets whining through the rain-heavy air. A rancher, Peter Hayes, cried out as a shot caught him in the arm. One of Drowner's guards stumbled, blood streaming from a graze across his shoulder. "Hold your fire!" Josiah shouted. "Every soul here is precious to the Lord!" Amanda clutched Hope closer as chaos erupted around them. Miners dove for cover. Ranch hands scattered. Through the confusion, she saw Silas Drowner's face twist with desperate calculation. He lunged toward her and the baby, surprisingly quick for his size. "Give me the child," he snarled, reaching for Hope. Amanda turned and ran, her bound wrists making it awkward to hold the crying infant. She heard Luke's heavy footsteps behind her, knew he was giving chase. Drowner's boots pounded the wooden porch as he changed direction, heading for the stables where fresh horses waited. But he never made it. Tony seemed to materialize from the shadows, silent as a hunting owl. The Navajo father's face was stern with righteous anger as he struck Drowner's gun hand with precise force. The weapon clattered away. Drowner swung wildly, but Tony moved like flowing water. He could have killed the mining baron in that moment. Everyone in the yard knew it. Instead, he brought his rifle butt down firmly on Drowner's shoulder and knee, dropping the larger man to the mud. "No more death," Tony said clearly. "No more stolen children." On the porch, Railroad Agent Pike watched it all unfold. His eyes darted between the armed townspeople, the fallen Drowner, and the damning journal in Amanda's grip. She saw the moment he decided to save himself, stepping back into the doorway with carefully raised hands. "Bind him," Luke ordered, and willing hands grabbed Drowner, securing him with rope from the stable. The rain began to fall then, fat drops that quickly became a steady downpour, It ran pink where it mixed with blood from minor wounds, washing away the signs of violence. Steam rose from the horse's flanks as thunder rolled overhead. Amanda felt Luke's strong hand on her shoulder. She turned into his embrace, still holding Hope close between them. The baby's cries softened to whimpers as the familiar scent of Luke's coat surrounded them both. "It's over," Luke murmured. "You're safe now. Both of you." Around them, men began helping the wounded. Mrs. Harlan appeared with bandages, directing care like a general. Tony stood guard over Drowner, rain streaming down his stern face. The preacher moved among the gathered crowd, speaking quiet words of comfort and reason. Blood and mud swirled together in little rivers across the yard, carried away by the cleansing rain. Hope hiccuped and settled against Amanda's chest, tiny fingers curling into the wet fabric of her dress. Above them, the storm clouds began to break, letting through the first pale rays of light. 1 week later, morning sunlight streamed through the church's small windows, painting golden squares on the worn wooden floor. The territorial marshal, a weathered man with iron-gray hair, sat at a makeshift desk near the altar, while his clerk's pen scratched steadily across paper. The simple sanctuary had become a court of justice. Amanda held Hope close as she testified, her voice clear despite the tremor in her hands. Luke sat nearby, a steady presence in his clean work shirt. Around them, townspeople and witnesses filled the pews, faces grim with purpose. "And this journal," the marshal said, carefully turning the worn pages, "belonged to the child's mother?" "Yes, sir," Amanda answered. "She gave it to me before she died, knowing what would happen to her baby." The clerk's pen paused briefly, then continued its documentation. One by one, witnesses came forward. A miner's wife described how her sister's newborn vanished after a suspicious illness. 2 former guards, seeking leniency, confirmed Drowner's network of bribes and threats. A camp cook testified about conversations overheard in the kitchen. "The evidence is conclusive," the marshal announced finally, closing the journal. "Silas Drowner will be transported east for trial on multiple charges of kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy to murder." Josiah bowed his head in silent prayer. Tony, standing near the back wall, nodded once in solemn satisfaction. Over the next days, hope spread through telegraph wires and posted letters. Messages arrived from other towns describing lost children and grieving mothers. Some families would be reunited, others had moved on or passed away. But for each child, a path forward emerged. "This little one will stay with the Carsons," Josiah said one afternoon, holding up a letter. "They've loved her like their own these 3 years already." "The Whitman boy's uncle is riding down from Denver," Luke added, studying another note. "Says he has his sister's eyes." Railroad agent Pike arrived at the church on a sunny morning, his suit slightly rumpled from an early ride. He found Josiah and a Navajo elder named Many Stars, waiting with Luke and several townsmen. Pike's smile was stiff, but professional, as they spread maps across the table. "The railroad is prepared to discuss alternate routes," he said carefully, "and fair compensation for water rights." "We're prepared to listen," Josiah replied, "so long as all parties are treated justly." The negotiations lasted hours, but by sunset, new agreements were taking shape. Many Stars insisted on protections for sacred sites. Local ranchers secured reliable water access. The railroad would have its route, but not at the cost of the community's soul. That evening, as pink clouds gathered above the mountains, the church filled again, this time for a joyful purpose. Lamplight gleamed on the copper baptismal bowl as Josiah lifted it carefully. "We gather to welcome this child into God's family," he announced, his voice warm. "Hope Amanda Branham, beloved daughter, precious gift." Amanda's eyes filled with tears as she held Hope forward. Luke stood close, one hand resting protectively on Amanda's shoulder. The baby cooed as Josiah sprinkled the blessed water over her dark curls. "Lord, watch over this little one," Josiah prayed. "Guide these who will raise her in faith and love. Though not joined by blood, they are bound by something stronger, your divine purpose that brought them together." Later that night, after the guests had gone and Hope slept peacefully in her cradle, Luke and Amanda walked slowly in the church garden. Stars pricked the velvet sky while crickets sang in the sage. "Amanda," Luke said softly, stopping beneath the old cottonwood tree. "I ain't got much to offer except my heart and my hands, but I'd be honored if you'd let me be Hope's father proper, and your husband." Amanda's breath caught. She looked up at this quiet, strong man who had risked everything to help her protect an innocent child, who had shown her what real love looked like through his actions every day. "Yes," she whispered, joyful tears spilling down her cheeks. "Oh, yes." Luke gathered her close, his own eyes bright with emotion. Above them, a shooting star traced a path of light across the dark sky, like God's own signature on their promise. The deep winter snows had settled across the valley in the weeks since the wedding. Morning sunlight sparkled off white-draped pines as Luke stepped out onto the cabin's front porch, steam rising from his coffee cup. The sturdy log home stood proudly on its hillside perch above Coldwater, smoke curling from its stone chimney into the crystal-clear air. From inside came the gentle sounds of Amanda singing a lullaby to Hope, her voice mixing with the crackle of the hearth fire. Luke smiled, remembering their simple wedding in Josiah's church just 3 weeks ago. The whole town had turned out, filling the small sanctuary with joy and hope. Even some of the Navajo had attended, Nez and Alani bringing special blankets as gifts. The cabin they now called home had risen quickly, thanks to many helping hands. Luke had chosen the spot carefully, close enough to town for community, but set apart enough for privacy. The logs were solid pine, carefully notched and chinked against the cold. 2 extra bedrooms extended from the main room, built with purpose. "Breakfast is ready," Amanda called from the doorway, Hope cradled in one arm, while she stirred something fragrant on the cook stove with her free hand. Inside, Sarah Miller and her young son Tommy already sat at the long plank table. They had arrived last week from a mining camp up north, hollow-eyed and weary. Now color was returning to Sarah's cheeks as she helped Amanda with household tasks, and Tommy's laughter rang through the cabin as he played with carved wooden animals Luke had made. "Much obliged," Sarah said softly, as Amanda ladled out bowls of steaming porridge sweetened with dried berries. "I don't know where we'd be if—" "No need to dwell on that," Amanda replied kindly. "You're here now, and that's what matters." Hope cooed from her cradle near the hearth, reaching tiny fingers toward the dancing flames safely behind the fire screen. Luke watched his wife, the word still filled him with wonder, tend to their expanding household with gentle efficiency. The cabin had quickly become known as a sanctuary for those in need, especially women and children seeking escape from harsh circumstances. The morning passed in comfortable routine until hoofbeats approached around midday. Luke stepped out to find Nez and Alani dismounting, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. "Welcome, friends," he called, helping Alani down while Nez unpacked their saddlebags. Amanda hurried out with a blanket for Alani, who had brought several pieces of fine silverwork to trade. The elderly couple settled by the fire, accepting cups of coffee while Tommy watched in fascination as Nez unwrapped delicate bracelets and necklaces set with turquoise. "Good silver," Nez explained, holding a piece up to catch the light. "Made with prayers for blessing." While Amanda and Alani discussed the jewelry, Luke and Nez stepped outside to where Tony was already at work on the new corral. The strong Navajo man swung his axe with practiced skill, shaping posts for the fence. "Good place here," Tony commented, pausing to wipe his brow despite the winter chill. "Strong walls, warm hearts." Luke nodded, thinking of the recent changes. The railroad's new agreement, carefully negotiated with input from both settlers and Navajo leaders, had established clear boundaries for grazing lands and water rights. The shared well now served several families without conflict, a small but significant sign of progress. As afternoon shadows lengthened, more visitors arrived. Josiah came first, then Mrs. Harlan with a fresh-baked pie. The blacksmith and his wife brought their children, and several ranching families rode in from nearby spreads. Soon the cabin hummed with conversation and laughter. Amanda moved through the crowd with natural grace, hope peaceful in her sling, while she directed the layout of a potluck supper. The long table groaned under dishes of venison stew, cornbread, preserved vegetables, and pies. Sarah helped serve while Tommy played with the other children in a corner. "Quite a gathering," Josiah observed, accepting a laden plate. "Reminds me of the early days of the territory, before greed poisoned so much." "Things are changing," Luke replied. "Slow but sure." The preacher nodded. "The Lord works in his own time. Sometimes what looks like an ending is just preparation for a new beginning." As twilight settled over the valley, lanterns were lit and hymns began to rise. Nez and Alani listened respectfully, occasionally humming along with tunes they recognized. Hope slept through it all. Tiny fingers curled around Amanda's shawl. Later, after the guests had ridden home through the starlit night, Luke stood in the doorway, watching lamplight spill across the snow. Amanda came up beside him, Hope drowsing against her shoulder. "I used to think God was finished with me," he said quietly. "After the war, after losing Mary, seemed like all I was good for was trapping and being alone." Amanda leaned against him, warm and solid. "Maybe all of that was preparing you for this, for being exactly what Hope and I needed, for helping build something good from so much pain." Inside, Sarah was singing softly to Tommy as she tucked him into bed. The cabin felt alive with peace, a shelter against the harsh world beyond. Luke and Amanda moved to Hope's cradle, their voices joining in a gentle hymn. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." The baby slept on, safe and loved, while outside the winter stars wheeled overhead, bright with promise. Here in this place built from mercy and hope, a new kind of family had taken root, one bound not by blood, but by choice, faith, and the courage to believe in second chances. Amanda's fingers found Luke's in the lamplight. Together they watched their daughter dream. Their home, oh, beacon of warmth against the darkness. Their hearts full of gratitude for all that had brought them to this moment of grace. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.